Now, for this episode of Big Brains, we're going to be doing some LCS, but I thought we'd take an interesting angle on this because let's be real, one of the reasons why this whole LS drama has supernovaed in the West in League of Legends isn't just like, he was the coach of Cloud9 or like, well, it's that realistically, this was the main reason a lot of people had to watch LCS this year. Like, it was the idea that, like, he's going to bring innovative approach and maybe he can do something that no one else in the West is doing. And also, then the Team Liquids of the world, when they go against his roster, how will that do? So with all that said, most people, myself included, don't watch the bad teams in LCS, or they very rarely do. So on this episode, what we're going to do is we're just going to tunnel on the elite teams. So we're going to talk about Cloud9, Team Liquid, 100 Thieves, and then we'll see beyond that. If people want to talk a little bit more, we can. But for example, obviously we won't be talking about TSM or fucking Dignitas or all those teams that aren't even worth wasting time. It's better to just go deep on these squads. So I've got two people here that I've had on past episodes. We've got in the top right-hand corner, we have got Yasukeh, who, if people don't know, is an NA Challenger Tryndamere one-trick player. So interestingly enough, we can also get an update on that as we did during Worlds, because bizarrely, during the time period when you actually get asked on shows, Tryndamere is constantly in the meta, which, I mean, that's the only time in history you could ever say that, basically. So bizarrely, that's the case. And then we've also got, and that also means, by the way, plebs, that technically he literally has played against Bjergsen, etc. You just watch him and have a parasocial internet relationship with him. Then the other person we have here is Keire, who people might remember is like an LPL and to some degree LCK enthusiast, but he watches loads of stuff around the world. People probably remember, if you try and like rack your brain, first of all, he never has a camera. That's a giveaway. Secondly, he does have an atrocious fucking Scottish accent. And thirdly, he's the guy where this is all you need to know. I was like, isn't fucking tactical bad? And then he was like something like, yeah, he's like, he almost made it sound like he was like a retard, basically. So all I'm going to say is, Keire isn't in the industry, so he can be unleashed in a way even I can't be, for that way. By the way, if anyone's seen him play for TSM, was he wrong? I'm just saying.
Best thing ever.
Was he wrong? Although the Joker's on that team is actually one of the better players. That's how fucking tragic they are. But as I said, this isn't about TSM this episode. So let's get into this topic, right? The obvious team to start with is Cloud9 to me, because let's talk about when they did have LS, what they were doing, what's going on with the roster. Obviously, we can speculate about what might happen after this. Right, Keire, what did you actually think? I know you're someone, listen, if people don't know, both these guys are on my Discord server. Spoiler, if you're a random moron, don't even join. You won't make it through. You won't last a week. But if you're cool, you can come. Basically, on my Discord server, most people there, I'm going to assume, are at a minimum like LS adjacent. They must at least be interested in the guy's content, because it's so adjacent to my content. It has so many overlaps in terms of, obviously, like the joke is, people used to, I know that this might sound implausible now, but years and years ago, people used to hate it when LS gave all these analogies to trading card games, Street Fighter, things. Now everyone loves it because they've realised it's his thing, innit? It's his shtick. It's his own unique approach to doing it, and it's a way to sort of get into his thinking. So, right, I'm assuming you guys in general, Keire, if we start with you, I'm assuming you were interested in this approach. You want to see what LS would be like in Cloud9, right?
Oh, massively so. And some of the players that he like brought over, I was like specifically like interested in. Like I like had a lot of respect for Summit as a player, but specifically the ADC player Berserker. I've been watching him in solo queue and in like LCK amateur with the junior squad, and this guy is in my opinion, is a really, really special player, and I was so happy to see, because for me, this guy is like this massive steal that C9 have been able to basically get this like talent and take it away from like the Korean system. I think.
To what extent then? If you've actually watched him, then expand on that a little bit. Like, give me an analogy, because the premise I have is this, right? So in the same way as I used to tell people back in the day, they should just hire basically people who are my friends who watch all the ERLs in Europe, and they could just get, basically the joke would be, if the next Caps is out there, they'll just get you in before he gets to a Fnatic or a G2. Who would this guy be if he'd been an LCK? Like, would he actually be like a star ADC, do you think?
Yeah, this guy, the crazy thing is the player that he's like is Guma. But he's like another version of Guma. He's probably less slightly, because Guma is just like such a like outlier, but he's like the next human being to that outlier.
Right.
He has a very, very similar playstyle, very similar champion proficiencies of like Aphelios, Jinx, Hyper Carry, Specialist. He has like a couple of like very small like pocket picks. Like I'm pretty sure he used to be like a Yasuo bot, like a player, things like this. But he's got very skilled, like mechanically. He's got the very like traditional, like Teddy style, ruler style, like very efficient, like movement, like very focused on his own survivability. He's a guy that you can give loads and loads of resources to, and even though he's a very young person, he's very responsible with the gold that you input into him, and it's a really great thing to see. It's a hallmark of like the traditional LCK Korean style AD series in the likes of Def, Teddy, those type of players. And I think this guy potentially could be within that lineage. And I think C9 have done an amazing job stealing this guy away, because this guy, for me, should have been the Damwon replacement for Ghost or something like that. And the idea that this guy isn't going to be native to the Korean system, and like they've managed to pull this person away. This is like when they went and got like incarnation from like Europe and stuff. Well, they've done this to Korea. This guy should have been someday within the Korean system, and now he's going to hopefully come up through the Cloud9 system.
Yeah, if people don't know, this actually is, funnily enough, the opposite version of what I once made a video about. I mean, famously now, it's like an infamous video because the fucking idiot Reddit mod fuckers just like removed it because it was racist or whatever. Where, because I used the analogy, the Underground Railroad, well, apparently you can't use analogies and metaphors in their world. You can, of course, still on this video, can't do fucking shit about it. But basically, my premise, if you remember, when he was on that LCK Challenger team, where it was the BBQ Olivers, the reason I found that interesting was the opposite way around. I thought to myself, he's inevitably going to find someone who he thinks is some sick Western and actually bring him into a Korean team. Like, we'll see him in LCK one day. Obviously now, that is obviously part of the appeal of when he was in Cloud9. We might get the opposite. The joke is he might actually get the next Korean talent. So it's cool that you're implying he did, basically. What do you have, like, in general, Yasukeh, as I bring you in now, what we'll do in this is, I don't really want to make that much of it about, like, the LS firing and what's happening, because that's what every show's been about, and everyone's talked at the death, and we still don't have any details, quite frankly. And I'll say this, the reports I have heard from behind the scenes are so conflicted and all over the place, mate. Like, there's no real obvious track on this one. I'd rather talk about the actual team, like what they were doing under LS, what you thought of the line. So give me some of your thoughts on this Cloud9 lineup.
Yep, so to just kind of piggyback off of the point of talking about Berserker, I believe that Gumayushi trained Berserker and was afraid that he would take his spot, because he also believed that Berserker was the second best AD carry in Korea. And overall with Cloud9, I feel like there's so much potential in this team. Like, they have so much raw talent, and the tragedy of LS leaving is that there's so much of these young players or players who are in new roles or volatile pieces. I think the only real stable piece on this team is Summit at a high level. And aside from that it's going to be a really hard thing to say about whether or not they're actually going to be able to get everything set up properly with all of these rookies, with all of these people in new roles into the future.
Because, I will say, yeah, go on.
Yep, because there's a lot of people that are still in Cloud9 who have the LS ideas. There's still people who are part of the church. But the problem is that if there's not a commanding presence there to actually hyper enforce that, which you would have gotten with LS, I don't necessarily know if those ideas are going to stick as easily as playing more meta, easy ways and not taking the risks for development that would be needed.
Right, when we talk about this topic, by the way, we can all take whatever angles we want and just jump in and out or wherever. As long as people are responsible, I trust that you know what you talk about. What I would say is this. The first main concern I have about this roster right now is I also think that I actually think the roster ended up looking better in its initial games than it probably is. Because, you know, they were all emphasising how LS wanted to do all the things that, funnily enough, you would talk about when you're not actually the coach. Like, if it was me, you know, I'd pull out this draft no one's seen before, or I'd play champions in roles you don't expect them from, based on solo queue or scrims. Like, they clearly were doing that a lot in these initial games to, like, test LS's theory. But I also think if you look at the roster composition, I think it probably actually helped the team, because if you're trying things out the opponent's never seen before, he doesn't have the answers as to how to beat that. It's not obvious. It's not streamlined as to what he does in response. So if you're working with a team with a bunch of Korean players who maybe don't have the best English, Blaber, who's in a totally different environment of players, Fudge role swap to mid, like, actually, as long as your team essentially know what they're going to do, you can actually sort of get like a very short-term advantage in some of those games. So my worry is this. Even though, as you say, there are still enough people in the org, they might like put some of LS's ideas into the team. At the end of the day, none of those people are LS. Like, those people, a lot of them them are just in the coaching circles of the normal world of like, after this, by the way, they'll want another job at a different team and they'll want to keep going for years. So unfortunately, the others I can't trust as well will actually stick to this. Like, I've get the feeling, you know, if it's week 6 of the season and you need to win this game, you just do a boring meta draft and you just win it. You know, I don't really know that they're there. LS doing this almost was just to make a point. Like, he wasn't doing it just for the money or to think it was the best team in the world. He was doing it to actually sort of put in practice all these theories and things he's come up with. So that's why, to me, it has like sort of sapped a little bit of my interest. Like, I don't think the raw lineup, these 5 players, is going to be as good personally without.
I don't think so either. I really, really hope though that like LS's like presence there, even within the region, because it's NA, I've got like less hope of this. But hopefully there's like maybe like you know what I mean, like a bit of them stays with it. Like other teams, maybe not just C9, can maybe look at some of the things they were doing and like, you know, make continuations of them. Not even if it's just a fundamental LS looking thing, but stuff like, you know, the Enchanters mid, like loads of teams can have their mid player be like, you know what, man, go throw 15 games at Soraka, you know what I mean, try out this Ivern thing, look at some of like the hallmark like stuff that this C9 squad was trying to do, and you maybe see, cause I think it was Peter Dunn said that actually a lot of the LS's scrims that he had with them were really invaluable, that the scrim quality with C9 was really, really high because LS exposed people to so many like strategies, like one after another, that like he was a very, very good like scrim partner because you were actually like learning a lot. It wasn't just like the same like Renekton top draft, jungler, tank jungler draft, tempo jungler draft, control mage mid. You were like 3/4 maybe strategies, and you were actually getting a bit of depth, a bit of learning.
I could see a world in which a lot of teams would cancel the scrim right after champion select if it was anybody but LS trying these drafts, like in the past, because they're just going to say, we're never going to play against this on stage. This isn't going to be good practice for us.
Sure.
Definitely.
I'll also say as well, there's the other part that is sad to me, is I know people are going to think I'm just saying this because I'm his friend or whatever, or support me. Like, genuinely, I actually think this was the only person in all of League of Legends I'm aware of in the West who actually has even like the goal, if you think about how they think about the game, to be ahead of everyone else. Like everyone else, the joke is, I always make this point and it just flies over people's heads. Even my favourite people who are experts in League, all the people I have on my shows, typically what they're doing is they're like the equivalent of like a historian who found like an ancient fucking pot in like Greece. They're just trying to decipher it and go like, oh, what was it and what were they trying to do? All they're trying to do with the LPL and LCK meta is that. Figure out what are they doing and why are they doing it. In fact, a lot of them even by default have the mentality that once they decipher what those Asian teams are doing, it must by default be the best thing. That's what they're going in with, a baked-in assumption. LS wasn't going to do that. I mean, people already saw it from his commentary and his analysis. So to me, the really exciting thing was, we'll never know now because it was only 2 weeks, but there's a world where he maybe could have actually for real like stumbled on the next big innovation or found something that like you could have been weeks or a month ahead of potentially even the best Asian teams. And so the reason why that's so exciting to me is it's the reason why I used to love fucking draft when G2 2019 played, because it was the one time I've ever seen in the modern day, like forget Moscow 5, it's like 2012 for fuck's sake. In the modern day, it's the only time I ever saw in the draft the fucking best Asian team look like the one who was on the hot seat, going like, what the fuck's coming next? Like, what the hell? Like, they looked like the ones that were uncomfortable. I've had to watch, like, at that point in time, like 6 or 7 years of every Western team. Like, they're always losing in the draft. They're always the ones that get tricked by the other pick. Their picks are obvious and get destroyed. Like, LS could actually have brought that back, like, almost that vibe that G2 had, because we've noticed no other team can really do what G2 did because they don't have the same special players. So, to me, this was the only other kind of secret sauce guy that we were working with in the scene. So, I think it's tragic. And then also, I can't even have one playoff run, not even one playoff series. I can't even see what like a real playoff draft would look like, because forget the lock-in, it didn't have enough good players. I wanted to see a real playoff series where, you know, like his team's down 1-2 and then he pulls out some god tier draft that he's been saving the whole time. So sadly we'll never get any of that stuff. On the rest of the roster though, thoughts on some of the other players? Like, I've got a question for you, Keire. I know a lot of the emphasis when he left the team LS was like, what my assumption was when he joined, which is like, surely of all the 5 players, Blaber's going to be the one that's going to be this guy's problem child. Like, it doesn't seem at all like an LS jungler. Like, he obviously has, I mean, let's just be real, just some of the ints alone. Like, if LS had been cast in that game 2 years ago, he'd go mental with some of these. But I noticed he sort of went out of his way when he left to sort of imply like he really respected him and all that jazz. I don't really buy that much myself, but what did you actually think when they were playing in the game, Keire? Did it seem like he meshed with Blaber, or what? How do you think he was trying to use him contrasted with past Blaber teams you've seen?
You know what? I'm a bit of a Blaber hater, right? But I'll give this guy his dues. Of all the players, I thought this guy was going to fuck everything up for like the LS like system that they were looking to play, but it actually wasn't him. I think Summit looked more disjointed to their like playstyle and his like champion pool and like what his like comfort picks was. When I actually look at like Blaber, I think Blaber was doing like loads of like stuff that were like hallmarks of like LS, like things that like just like stat checking people. Folk were just like walking, like the famous when he was on the Olaf into the Victor, it was just like stat checking him every single time with the Enchanter. And it wasn't like, oh, we'll do it once. It's like, no, like when the guy came back, he's done it again, and he came back and he's done it again because, and it looked like the guy like understood, like, yeah, I've got these heals, I've got these strengths. I think it, apart from the Karthus game, which was just a very, like just an overall very bad game for Blaber, I was really surprised with how he done the system. If you look at the team and you look at the jungle, of the teams we're going to talk about today, C9 are like one of the teams that I really respected because they didn't really have like the mind-numbing Drake priority where they have to like show up at every Drake and stare at it being taken and bleed gold all over the map, right? C9 didn't buy into that shit. C9 were like, you know what? You take the first 2 Drakes. They're garbage. But you know what? See the third, the fourth one, we're coming with people that are farmed. We've got an extra item than you. We've got like better map position than you. And they were very happy to just show up at the Drake team fights with item advantages and gold advantages and beat people. And some of that is dependent on your jungler, because you know your jungler fundamentally has to go to the Drake to take it. He's the most important person there. And Blaber wasn't falling into these pitfalls. So there had to, in my opinion, from what I've seen, there has to be some belief and buy-in from the system, because the guy wasn't just like ending at Drakes or just randomly showing up at Drakes and trying to flash walls. Like, he was doing the things, farming the camps, creating a lot of the excess gold leads when people were on enchanters. I've got to say I respect it, because there was a lot more buy-in there than I thought.
Blaber, I don't think that Cloud9 was ever going to get rid of him. LS might have wanted to maybe get another jungler if maybe Thorin was available or something. That might have been a better fit for
Seems like a good fit, yeah.
Yeah. But the LS Cloud9 iteration was playing very well around Blaber's upsides. Having enchanter mids and a carry jungle, like that played really well into that aspect of Blaber's play, while also being able to reel in like the random ints from a team-wide aspect. Like not giving Blaber the situation to where he would do something crazy because they already have such a clear win condition, that I believe that they used Blaber just really, really well.
The one thing I will say is this as well, because a lot of, like as I said, let's be real, like most of the attention on Cloud9 was just LS. It was every road leads to Rome. Like it was, how does Blaber play under LS? How does Fudge play as a roll top mid under LS? How does Summit play? Because LS always thought he was great. So the one player I always thought was completely, I still don't really even know why he's on this roster, aside from import aspects, is the fucking Winsome guy. Like, I still don't even really know like what the deal is with this player. Like, this is if I had to pick the player where it's like, maybe LS sees something in him, but now that we're just a normal team again, who is this guy?
From what I was able to garner from like the research that I'd done from him, he's like, maybe LS probably has a different reader on him. This is the guy that really made no sense. Like, this guy is like a Korean, but he's like an LPL engaged support specialist. When I went and checked his games, this guy just plays like tons of engaged support. He's very good at Thresh. So, like, you know, that's like a big prop right now. Like, Thresh-based ADC systems are really popular. So, you know, if you can get... And Thresh likes the first pick. Ellis likes the first pick Thresh. But this guy was playing, like, Leona, Alistar. This guy, like, basically, Rel. Like, you think of all the engaged supports that are infamous from the LPL. This guy played them. And this guy played them super aggro. So, I was kind of surprised with his pickup once I had a look at his gameplay. But, yeah...
It's also that he's not an import, so you would have to compare him to domestic players. And
yes,
like, are there going to be any other domestic players that you could get? And since you also have the kind of culture of already having so many Koreans, even if you have a player who might be equal to Winsome, there's the idea of having the culture there, and the culture fit would be really important.
Yeah, I will say, by the way, there's another thing that I think is actually sad about the fact that we didn't see, like, at least a split of the LS experiment, is he also seemed to have assuming he was really behind all these moves, it looks like they are if you look at who all the players are and the context of why they would be in this team. If he really was behind why they signed these players, and he was the one who suggested them, I also think a really exciting prospect, and we'll just have to discuss it abstractly now since no one's going to fucking do it in the game at this point, is basically, I'll give you a very brief analogy that unfortunately, I understand we've got American viewers, and Yasukeh's obviously from America, so it's not going to translate as an analogy, but basically there's an old school European soccer, so football in Europe, manager who's dead now, sadly, he died in the 90s, I think, who was called Brian Clough, right? And what he was basically, Yasukeh was, he was like the ultimate like working class coach, as in he came from being a good player himself, and he was just like the ultimate like his approach was like, he was like a dictator. Like, you had to just do everything he said, exactly the way he says it. And if you don't, by the way, he was the sort of guy where you might even be a good player and he might just cut you if he just doesn't think you fit the team. And what made the way he coached super interesting is, this is why it ties, I'm giving the analogy in the parallel to LS here, is he really thought he just had a vision of how he's supposed to play football. So what he did literally was he even used to have these things that would sound almost like, you'd almost think this was like insulting or condescending to say this to a professional player, but he would actually tell his players in football basically almost like a simple guideline, and then he just expected you to know how to play. So the joke was, he would say to the goalkeeper, kick that ball as far away from our goal as possible. And then he would go to the defender and he'd go, you're supposed to stop anyone coming in here, to the goalkeeper. Then he would go to the midfielder, push the ball up, then pass it to someone who could do something with it. And if you're the striker, score me a fucking goal. He would just have all these like ridiculous, like what sound like really glib statements. But the point was, he wasn't just saying it as nonsense, by the way. What he really was doing was, he was trying to recruit players that played each position the way he thought it should be played. And then after that, he just expected you, because he's recruited the right player, to know how to do it. He trusted that you knew what he meant by that. And if you didn't, like I said, you actually might be a good player, but he might cut you and bring in some guy you've never heard of, but plays exactly how he wants to. I got the vibe that's what Ellis was trying to do here. Like, you look at the team he built, like, one of the obvious reasons, by the way, why you do the Fudge roll swap to mid isn't just like, but Fudge is really good. It's like, Fudge is his fucking protege. It's the guy who, like, basically has been the most all in on Ellis's ideas since day one of being in LCS, and as a result, wasn't just roll swapping to mid. He was roll swapping to play stupid shit like Soraka and fucking Ivern. Like, this was the guy who was in on that idea. I can tell you right now, I know loads of really good mid laners who you might get them to play a week of Ivern. After that, they want that Ariana pick. They want that fucking Silence pick. They're not coming back to play gimmick stuff. So I even think if you look at the team and all the people and all the reasons I've heard from them being signed, it also sounds like that was a very interesting aspect. It sounds to me like LS, that's why I don't personally think it was ever an issue with buying. It sounds like everyone sort of understood coming in, this is what sort of team we're going to be. And it was certainly a very fascinating prospect, because every other team, as far as I know, is built the other way around. They just give you as the coach a bunch of players, and you just have to hope that your GM did a good job. And then from whatever pieces you have, you just have to construct a team. You have to figure out, like, after the fact, like, fuck, what do I do with this guy? And I mean, I guess I could use this guy as like just a farming ADC. Like, you have to do all these weird band-aids and stuff. What I want, obviously, is genius figures who then they actually get to implement what they want in the game. What, he saw 4 games, though, even still, like, that's why I'm hyping it, like, I just saw some, like, 5 years of it. Saw 4 games, for fuck's sake.
I actually think, I know we're talking very abstractly, but just as a little precursor, and the thing that, like, kind of exploded this to me, it could have been one game, and I might be blowing it up, but I think it's interesting to talk about it. I actually think the Fudge being there would maybe be a blessing and a curse. He would, like, play anything that LS would want him to play. But say you went into playoffs and you're in game 5, I actually think LS would fall into the trap of being like, this is the guy I trust the most on the team, and this is the guy I'm going to, like, draft for. I'm going to give, like, the counter pick to this guy, or I'm going to do this guy. I'm going to make sure he has the good matchup, right? And he's roll swap mid, and I just sometimes don't think Fudge, as a player fundamentally, and especially if your view of this team was to beat the elite Asian teams, I don't think he was a player to, like, base those principles around. When I look at that team, when the Fudge Aurelia game is by far the worst game in terms of their system breaking down. I think that game was just a complete, like, devolution of the team, and when they actually fell back onto some of their more basic and, like, primal team fighting, like, mechanics and stuff like that, I seen, like, massive holes in, like, Fudge's gameplay. maybe Aurelia wasn't the pick. It's one of the hardest champions to play in League of Legends. But if Ellis is trusting him with Aurelia, like that's kind of got to be like expressed, and there's expectations there, and you're getting somewhat of a counter matchup. You've got to like carry the game. And so I think it could have possibly become in a pitfall of LS and big pressure games to like build around Fudge as his like guy in the team.
Yeah, Cloud9 is definitely it's such a development team, not in the way that most of the league teams use of picking trash players and then throwing them away the next year. But this is a team that had such a high ceiling and such a high potential if they were sort of coached properly. Whereas if you just contrast it to like Team Liquid, those are all players who you really don't need a coach to make Team Liquid work. Like that, they could probably win LCS without any coaching staff. Just from pure raw player strength. Whereas with this lineup, like I don't trust Fudge to play standard mid things to the level that would it take to win LCS or to do anything international.
100%.
Like they relied so much on being the LS team that if they're not the LS team, I'm not sure if they're going to have much.
I wanted to ask you about that because obviously you play mid yourself. That's the main concern I have now that LS isn't there. Is to me, like I say, the whole purpose of letting this Fudge role swap happen was that. Like, put it this way, the best person to put the onus on here is Cloud9, not LS or Fudge, which goes like this. Cloud9, you had Jensen a few years ago. Recently, you had Perks, which you broke the bank for, in order to do things like be in the playoffs of Worlds. Now, after that, I don't want to hear, you notice this is a Peaver man recently on shows, I don't want to hear fans go, but Fudge is all right, or he wasn't the worst player. No, that's the expectation. You need to be Jensen or Perks. That's the level of player that you're at if you're fucking Cloud9. By the way, spoiler, if that was just the kind of person you were in the market for, and you didn't, for example, like, spoiler, the reason they didn't want Jensen back is they essentially kicked him out because they thought it was like a bit low-key toxic or something. That's why they let him go to Team Liquid. Okay, then why weren't you bidding till the end of the earth for fucking Bjergsen, Why weren't you in that mix, Because to me, the problem I have is, this is why I want to ask about what you think about him as a mid laner, is, I'm sorry, mate, like, I just don't buy the idea. Like, the team itself has enough skill in Summit and Blaber are obviously mega for their roles in domestically. And then if the Berserker hype works out, maybe he can even be like a true international level ADC. The trouble is, unless I miss something, the game is still always going to be about mid lane. Like, it's going to be really hard to fucking do deep finish at Worlds without a top mid laner. It might even be hard to win LCS, who knows? And I'll even add in as a last detail, the reason why, because I know every fan's going to go, but look at him in LCS, it was fine. It's like, bro, I know all the mid laners that came from Europe. They all tell me the same story. You go to America, you go in a solo queue, you even play the other real mid laners, and you're like, holy fuck, do they lane like this for real here? Like, they don't even like contest the creep, or in like certain matchups, they just sort of concede the lane before it's even been played. Like, dude, some of these European mids I've known have really been like genuinely shocked when they found this. And then they would be like, that's not even just the off season, it just stays like that the whole season long. And then you find even in LCS, you can just play matchups you shouldn't be able to play. You can just sort of play safe in lane and you don't get punished and shit. Like, they basically told me mid lane in LCS is like a fucking black hole. It's like you have to exit it when you come to the international tournament and sort of remember what everyone else plays the role. So how would you speculate, or how do you, from what you've seen of Fudge, like, what do you think of him as a mid laner? Obviously, we're going to have to ignore him as a top laner for the moment.
Yeah, so it would be really interesting to look at the sort of deep cuts of the history of Fudge as a player. This concept that LS talks about is that most players who become highly successful pros were already within high challenger within their first year or two of playing the game.
For sure, yeah.
Whereas Fudge was a player who was like hard stuck like silver or gold for 5+ years of playing the game. And then just like went super, super far up after that. After like talking to LS and stuff like several years ago. So
no, here's the thing though. Obviously, by that you literally mean like, we're getting some coaching and some advice. Because when you say like talk to LS, it sounds like that fucking scene in the Bible where that woman like reaches out and grabs Jesus' coat, and then like he feels the power go out of him, and like suddenly she's healed or whatever. Like, it wasn't like that. LS wasn't like, how you doing, kid? Like, oh no, I could be someone. Fuck, like, I get what you mean. Okay.
But yeah, so a lot of that could be into. I know that he spends a lot of time in a lot of 1v1s and a lot of practicing of these specific matchups, and he'll put a lot more focused time, and that might have been what made him become the top laner that he was. But I don't think that it's going to be so easily to do that quickly in the mid lane, just because not only do matchups play differently, although in LCS, like you said, people don't really contest creeps as much. They don't actually play mid lane. So he can probably get away with it if he had other pieces on his team, but I don't see him being anything more than a middle of the pack at best mid laner.
Have you actually matched up with him in solo queue at all?
I played with him a lot top lane last season, but nothing recently.
Fair enough. What are your thoughts, Keire, on this topic, if you have any?
I think he's like actual like fundamental laning and actual like mid lane stuff looked garbage, like when he wasn't like on, the enchanters and stuff. I don't know how you would realistically
I would still say he's a middle of the pack LCS player, despite being at the level he's at.
If you're gonna you say they go to MSI and your goal's to damage, the top Asian teams. A V5 go is Rajcula, right? Fudge is gonna be laning into Rajcula, right? That's you. Your system can be very good. Nothing will make up for the fundamental damage that Rajcula is going to do to you in lane. And if you can ask them all before, it shakes your fundamentals. It blows your mind how much that guy will blast you off the face of the planet. And there's a lot of mid laners that can do that in LPL from those teams. And there's a couple in, in LCK, it's no joke. And I don't know, like Fudge on these like conventional picks. I just had a lot of like doubts for me. I don't know what like consistent elite systems you would be able to build around it, but I feel like the thing that LS had him for was that flexibility, was that buy-in, that belief in the LS like things. So as I said before, it is a double-edged sword. Fudge is still just Fudge. He's an average mechanical pro with decent matchup understandings and like some nice laning strats sometimes. But at the end of the day, even his team fighting, is it that crazy? Is it that elite? Do you watch him and go, oh my god, Fudge is carrying all these team fights? Not really. Never really thought of him as that type of player. Split push player, never really thought of him. It's like something that maybe LS could bring as a remake. Could they teach him? Maybe. But is that like something I've ever seen him like do naturally on his own? I'm not sure. There's a lot of like space there.
Go on.
Yeah, this is something that I was thinking about, even if LS stayed on the team, is that you may, Ivern and Soraka, just as example picks, they are relatively safer in lane, but it's also, he can get by with that safety in an A. But against the top elite Korean and Chinese players, I don't think that he would be able to get through that laning phase free without just having to concede so much.
Yeah, another concern I have as well is, like I said, he plays mid lane. Here's the thing, right? You'll notice when I talk about that principle of people who, it's not about whether they're the best, like, at their lane now. It's like, do they understand, like, how to end the game, for example? Do they have, like, decisive quality? Right? You'll notice, yeah, there are some mid laners I put in there who aren't always the best laners. Like, for example, Perks last year, go back a few years, Doinby were examples. Like, they're more people who win the game than win the lane. Here's the difference, though. They either have to be on the absolute best team, like you've seen there, to do it if they're not good laners, or they have to be like so genius at what they're going to do that they can essentially make up for not being ahead in lane, in items, in stats, etc. Like realistically, of all the roles, mid lane, you have to at least still be a fucking good laner. You have to still know what you're doing in these matchups. Because think about it, right? Perks last year is the best example ever. Even when he would go for like the game-winning play, sometimes he didn't hit the game so much it didn't matter. It wasn't the game-winning play anymore. Like it would have been if he'd have been like old Perks, or this season's Perks if you watch him in LEC. But like essentially his laning and at certain times where he just wasn't as good as a mid laner was inhibiting his game. It was a bottleneck. Whereas like top lane's probably the most classical example because top lane doesn't even have to play carries sometimes. You can just be an okay sort of tank player who just knows what to do in team fights. You know how to appeal for your specific mid laner. These things can get you by. Like for me, mid lane's the one role. You can't, like there's no fake in mid lane. There's no such, it's a bit like Orpra and Counter-Strike if you know it. Like you're either really good and you deserve to play the role or you will be an obvious liability for your team most times out if they lose the game. Like it'll just be obvious, you know. I think it's the role you get exposed the most in.
Yep, like just mid laners are just fundamentally the best players in league, and I have no bias when saying that. But yeah just there's just so much more of a requirement, not only in terms of playing so many different types of champions, but just in terms of how much the game is relied upon with you. Like if you have no prio mid and the enemy is just able to walk first to every play in lanes where they shouldn't be able to, like you're just going to solo lose your team the game. And I don't think there's really any role that has that much responsibility put on them, especially when it comes to how the sort of engine of the game works in the earlier stages of the game.
By the way, I'm not joking. I've obviously known loads of pros and had many of my friends, etc. If I could go back in a time machine now and tell, like, at the end of season 3, if I could go and tell my friends who were ADCs and top laners how long League of Legends lasts and how the general characterization of the roles, I'm not even trolling, they would all switch to mid lane immediately. They would all just say, even if it takes me like a year off my career, I'll just do it. Because essentially, like, the amount of agency you have if you're really good and you're a mid laner on the map, in your team, in your career, it's mental. Like, you're the only fucking role essentially who doesn't just get killed by the meta every half a year. Like, you don't, it's always there for you. But I will say, you better always be good, which is the point of this conversation. You can't sort of just fuck around and get propped up. Like, even these drafts would eventually have gotten exposed if it indeed was just the draft doing it. Like, at the end of the day, the player would have to do something as well. Right, I've got this question then. Try and speculate forwards, project forwards. Now that we know there's no LS, and we're assuming, some elements of this staying as much as people bought into it, but I'm guessing they become more like just an LCS team with really good players again. What actually happens to Cloud9 now? I mean, I know some people, interestingly enough, LS was almost their only angle. Otherwise, they all thought Team Liquid had, the fucking Exodia team or whatever on paper. I thought it was a bit overrated, but I get what people mean. It's a pretty good line on paper. What happens now, Yasukeh? What happens to Cloud9 beyond this, do you think? Like, can they be the best team, for example? Do you think they win LCS?
So I thought before they had the potential of beating Team Liquid, but now I don't necessarily think that. I think that they're probably weaker individually in places where it matters against Team Liquid, which is the biggest potential hurdle of winning an LCS title. I think that there's still a potential chance, but overall, I think they'll probably potentially make the finals. They'll probably make the finals, and I really kind of see not high ceilings for them at this point, just because of how many weaknesses and how disjointed the team is. If the team is going to succeed, it's going to be they're still all bought into the LS system, but they're just doing it with LS spiritually as opposed to LS physically there with them. And I just don't necessarily see that as something that is going to be likely to happen. That there's too many things and you don't have LS. And I just think that they're going to be a good LCS team.
What do you think, Keire? Where would your projections be for the team?
So, unless they have some sort of mental collapse, internal struggles, I just think, because we'll come into this, the two teams that they have to beat, the thing they prey on is bot lanes and ADC players and NA being morons and shit. And I don't think they're going to get that from C9, because I think quite highly of Berserker. And so I actually think fundamentally they match up quite well against the people that they have to beat, the other elite teams. Because the way that they two teams win most of their games, C9 might not actually give them those openings. And when I look at these other teams, a lot of it's going to, we've ended up at one of these points where basically NA's going to come down to key team fights. They set up for these key team fights and who executes on them better than the other team. And I think, you could put C9's name in that ring. We'll need to see a bit forward. I think, same as Yasukeh, they can be in the finals. I think they could maybe even win finals. I think it would be very, very, very close if they do. But it's hard to say.
I will say
that is actually just one angle that I just sort of thought of, is that both Cloud9 and Team Liquid, I feel like their best pieces are the same in that their bot lanes are both good and their top lanes are both good. So they do clash well to where I feel like the biggest Team Liquid win conditions wouldn't necessarily be able to come to fruition because they are against a solid rock to go against.
One thing I'll throw out there is I know a lot of people are doing that logic of like, well, Max Waldo is LS's protege, therefore he's still there, so it's all fine. And like, one thing I'll say in general in life is this: don't ever send a Robin to do a Batman's job. It doesn't fucking work. There's a reason this guy wasn't a main head coach for any other team, including Cloud9. There's a and here's the problem: he might even have the same vision LS does. Maybe he really is from the same lineage of thought. It certainly sounds like it when I've heard him talk on streaming and interviews. The problem is this, though. Another thing LS had going for him, like a motherfucker. And think about the team that we're talking about, Cloud9. This is what they've wanted in the past, as far as I can tell. They want charismatic coaches because that's who sells you on unique ideas. Reapered, LS. You talk to these guys for 5 minutes. Like I'm known to be like a critic of Reapered. If I talk to him, the guy's a brilliant guy. Like he's super interesting. Yeah, you would start getting interested in his explanation of why he did this draft or do that. Here's the problem: people like Max Waldo, I'd even say potentially someone like Mithy. Actually, I never got the vibe like they just dominate a room like that. If people don't know, Mithy's vibe was like the old man sage vibe. It's more like he's the guy who doesn't have to say anything, but then when he does, because he's such a legendary player, the other players just sort of shut up and, all right, Smithy talking. It's not like, though, you walk in the room and throw the doors open, like, guys, here's what we're doing today. It wasn't that fine. So I will say, I already do have mild concerns over the coaching angle in that sense. Like, basically, as far as I can tell, their team is coached by Fudge now with the help of Max Waldo. So as long as they're on the same page, I think they're probably fine. But if there's ever a problem, that could go fucking south real quick. So let's go do the transition, since obviously Team Liquid, you guys have contrasted them already. So let's just talk about Team Liquid. Let's put our cards. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I do have one more thing.
Go on.
I've done coaching with, I've had several coaching sessions with Max Waldo.
Okay.
Yeah. He's definitely just one of those pure kind of ideas person that focuses just on the ideas. He's not the mentality of somebody who's going to be a head coach. He's not very charismatic. Like he's not going to command a room, but he really is just kind of an ideas guy.
Yeah. And if people don't get the premise there, even if the idea is good, it's how you sell people on it as to whether they do it or not. Like the joke is, in fact, the funny thing is now he's obviously on one of the best teams, but when everyone, as I always reference on shows, because it is true, not only on shows did people mildly used to flame Yamato Cannon when he was the coach of the smaller LEC teams, but mate, the experts behind the scenes used to fucking be so bitter to that guy because their perception was like, oh, he just has a good voice, he just seems cool, you know, like he doesn't know as much about me about the game. And I used to tell them, yes, dumb fuck, but the difference is if I send you into a room with some of Europe's best players and you start awkwardly coughing and nervously like writing on a chalkboard, they're not even going to listen to you, mate. You'll never get to the end of the idea. Whereas if he really does walk in and he has presence and he looks slick and he has the voice and the confidence and the oomph, that instantly you're going to at least listen, even if you think it's nonsense. Like it's a different vibe. So okay, let's start talking about Team Liquid, because here's the thing that's going to make this podcast already interesting. Mark the time. This might be where it goes apeshit. Cards on the table. I already know from doing all the watch parties, Keire is sort of low-key in my camp. I don't even know why I say low-key. It's high-key in my camp, where we are essentially the heretics of the Church of Bjergsen. We think it was really good years ago, but we also think at times Jensen was better. Spoiler, we also watch international competition. Are you guys all fucking eternal sunshine of the spotless mind to yourself every time you're a TSM fan every fucking Worlds? I was watching those tournaments. So what I want to know actually, Yasukeh, is where are you on this one? Like, obviously now we're going to talk about, like, you sort of hinted at it there. You actually implied, like, maybe Bjergsen isn't the star player of Team Liquid. Maybe he isn't even that good. So where is the cards on the table? Where have you been at over Bjergsen's career, and where are you at on him now?
So I first off, I would say that Bjergsen is probably the worst roster move, replacing him with Jensen, probably in all major regions combined. And that can be true even if they make it to finals of an MSI or a top 4 at an MSI. If they make it to a quarters at Worlds and they win both splits. All of that can be true, and Bjergsen can still be really bad.
Okay.
Because so many other pieces in Team Liquid could potentially carry him. And even though I think that Bjergsen is not a good player right now, in the slightest, his sort of very passive style can fit well into getting carried by the rest of the team.
Well, give us some thoughts as well. Like before he became the coach at TSM, how did you evaluate him as a player? And like as you're saying here, it's mainly like at the moment he's not in good form, right?
Yeah, definitely more now. He's not in good form. I don't think that he's the Bjergsen of the past. I don't think that the Bjergsen of the past was this super amazing carry that would even contend with like being top 20 mids worlds. Top 20 mids in the world ever. I don't think he's ever really been at that point. He has a very good style for playing NNA, and abusing the weaknesses of NA. But every time he's gone to an international competition, whenever he has people who are actually contesting him, he just falls under the pressure. And he's not somebody who really can succeed outside of the NA system. He's molded to be the most optimal person if you want to win an LCS championship, and one of the worst if you want to do anything at World.
Okay, where are you at on this, Keire?
Oh, the Bjergsen thing alone, I think it's garbage, man. I think that I don't know what this guy does well apart from the full thing of he plays Zillion. It's I'm just not getting it. I know it's Bjergsen. In the past, I think he's a great player. I think he's one of the best NA players ever. I've got a lot of respect for, he's drag teams, he's carried teams and all that. But in this Team Liquid's setting, in this Team Liquid lineup, I do not know what, and I look at what they fundamentally do on the map and how they play. I do not know what he does better than what Jensen would have done. You realise these guys had Jensen on their team. I'm sure they've literally got a stats department and stuff like that. Jensen, the things that Jensen was doing on these teams was obscene. That Team Liquid, the team with Jensen on it, was playing consistently in mid lane without a jungler. You had the Broxite era, you had Thorin, who's still trying to learn where mid lane and top lane are, and you had Xmissy before, who basically knew how his bread was buttered and loved double lift, right? Jensen played through all of those eras, hardly any systematic ward setups, and this guy was one of the best laning. He's so unbelievably consistent. He can play Zillion as well, by the way. You're going to just retcon history. He can, 100% can. That is a fact. So I just don't know what Bjergsen does better. This guy is mediocre in team fights, mediocre in lane. If it's a comms thing and you're thinking this guy's a shot caller and stuff, it's I'm not sure how important that is in this team when you've got as Yasukeh said, all these experienced players and stuff. When I see the Jensen version of this team, I think it's just plug, play, go, win LCS, NSI. When I see the Bjergsen version of this team, mental in my head, I'm this is plug, play, go, maybe win LCS, MSI. Sad days in Hawaii, by the way. What is going to happen unless there's crazy level up changes? What's going to happen to this man at international tournaments will be murder. Absolute murder.
Yep. I think that Team Liquid with Jensen had such a high potential. They could have been real world beaters on the level of a 2019 G2. Whereas with Bjergsen, I don't see that ever happening. And I've played against Bjergsen several times recently. I've watched his streams, and watching his first-person views alone should just tell you that he's just not a super high-class world beater player. He's not garbage, but he's not somebody deserving of the GOAT status NNA, making you think that he's going to be the best player. Is not even close to that. And when I've played against him, there's just there's no pressure that I'm given. There's no feeling of, is this guy really supposed to be the guy with 8-9 LCS titles that's supposed to be the best player? If Bjergsen is the best that NA has to offer, then we have no hope.
Yeah, I certainly have my own concerns on that. If people don't know, by the way, my takes have fucking aged so beautifully. I told you, I even made a video, it's on my channel right now, go click it. I told you before he'd coached one game, he wouldn't be the best coach. Everyone else just did that thing of but he was a really good player and I know he works really hard and he is smart about the game. And somehow they think, by the way, I had 1 million of those points. They're all just narrative points, you fucks. None of those mean you're ever going to be a good coach. Like we said about the Max Waldo thing earlier. Right, first of all, by the way, spoiler, Max Waldo knows way more about the general game of League of Legends than Bjergsen does. Bjergsen just played fucking mid lane. And then second, and also just did NA for fuck's sake, which as we just said earlier, is the training wheels version. And then secondly, the difference is, Max Waldo just didn't have extra coaching skills like the presence, and he hadn't done the job long enough, right? Bjergsen hadn't done it either. There was no reason to actually think he'd be some godlike coach. Then on top of that, this is why when I heard he's coming back to play, I remember thinking this is a terrible idea. It's why did he quit in the first place? Because as far as you can tell by the way he quit and the fact he stayed with TSM and he just stayed as the coach, and it seemed to me like he kept his option open that he could always come back to TSM. Spoiler, you think it's a coincidence he chose to have Power of Evil, not Jensen replace him? That's awfully convenient when you might want to come back a year later. Spoiler, it'll be hard to do that if the guy who replaces you then does something internationally. Probably won't happen. So in my opinion, I thought like he only did like a half retirement anyway, but I would always say this question that I always ask people in Counter-Strike, my whole native game, when they say they're going to retire. I tell them, remember the reasons right now why you're retiring, because when you try your comeback in a year and a half, these reasons are why it is a waste of time and you won't make it. Because if, for example, you've lost the love of the game, you're not as good at the game anymore, you don't like practice, like, time off will make those reasons not seem as big. You'll start thinking, I actually want to play again. You might do what Bjergsen claimed. You know, everyone says he was saying shit like, well, I'm just watching my own mid laner play solo queue and I'm better than him. Like these are idiotic reasons to play the game, by the way. Like, these are just things that you think of, passing thoughts while you're retired, and you can't have the ultimate agency, because, spoiler, every player who can play now would always rather play on the 10th best LCS team than coach the best LCS team. That's just the nature of the thrill of being a player and how addictive competition is, and the idea of, you know, accomplishing your dreams. It's just the way things are. So in my opinion, I actually think the fact that he really, same with Doublelift, the fact that you were like very seriously you wanted to retire, you were right then. You were right the first time. You should have retired. Because years later, you'll come up with other reasons why. But that can be a deception in itself. Like, I could give it another go. In this case, I think he just came back because he looked like he had an amazing team, blah, blah, blah. Because I have to say, this is the most underwhelming Bjergsen I've ever seen. Like, I was never a super hater. Like, I thought even at the end, he was still a competent player. It's just I knew internationally he'd get exposed. I agree with you. When I've watched the Team Liquid Bjergsen, this year's Bjergsen, if I took the nameplate off, dude, I wouldn't even know this was like a Team Liquid mid laner. This could just... In fact, I might even believe this was like an NA player they're testing out and I'd be like, he seems a bit nervous on stage, you know, playing a bit conservatively sometimes. Oh, that pick. Do they not even consider him a star? Like, dude, I would never guess this was Bjergsen. And I even think, actually, and this is blasphemy to say, but who gives a fuck? It's my shit. I will say this as well. I think if you even look at the history of Bjergsen in TSM, there's a little bit of fuckery there, which is a lot of his best champions and the ones that in the draft you'd try and get him were almost to band-aid the other problems they had elsewhere on the map. Like, if you think about it classically, even though in your brain Bjergsen plays like Zed and Fitz, no, it doesn't. Those aren't the champions you would ever draft for Bjergsen. You would never give Bjergsen like the super carry assassin mid and just step back, boys. Watch out for the... He ain't the guy like Perks who's doing like the game 5 LeBlanc. He like, right, sit back. He's going to carry this game. The joke is, beyond Syndra, which, spoiler, was just his signature champion from day one, he wasn't really the guy you went to was like, this, watch out for this. He's really going to dominate this. Like, he'd do the odd game of that internationally, but I could never rely on him in the same way. So I always thought there was a little bit of a mirage about who Bjergsen was anyway, but I just find this one really underwhelming because now, this is like the sort of scenario where, as you said, there's a world where he'll still win LCS. And spoiler, when he wins LCS, the whole broadcast and fans will gaslight you that it's just same old, it's like Tom Brady. Is still the best. Wow, winning more. Wow, really is goated, isn't he? They'll even, by the way, get ready for this, because this is going to tilt you off the face of the planet. If they win LCS, they'll say he definitely was better than Jensen would have been. Even though there's no rationale to do that, they will just say it. Spoiler, by the way, could Jensen have a fucking lineup like this? I'd like to see him play with his team. Did I miss something? He played without a jungle role last year, and as Keire said, he had fucking Broxton before that. Like, can Jensen ever get a break? Apparently not. But anyway, read it back in. Is there any more on the Bjergsen angle? Do you want to talk about the rest of Team Liquid? Where do you want to go?
The fact that they put that goat tweet out tilted me.
Oh, that's mad, wasn't it?
TL, by the way, you should have a monument out to Doublelift in the middle of your gaming centre, because that guy dragged your nothing org and you became perennial winners off of the tail end of his legacy and his play. There is no way Jensen was coming to play at TL if Doublelift wasn't there and had turned that into a winning organisation, because nobody looked at your organisation and thought you were a winner. And the fact you're buying into the full, like, oh, Bjergsen's the goal, that he is NA, man. It's like, you literally had Superman, the Man of Steel, Doublelift in your team, the hope of NA, and you are at if I was him, I'd be looking at that and I'd be like, I'm thrown so under the bus. It's so mad disrespectful. But I've got my hatred out there. I'm happy with that.
Because, by the way, even though some fan now is going to do the annoying reply guy NPC thing of like, but Thorin, he is their current player though, and Jensen and Doublelift aren't in the team anymore, so why wouldn't you just hype him? Because think about any sport in the world. Do you think if fucking LeBron joins the Chicago Bulls tomorrow, the first tweet's like, the GOAT has joined the Bulls? Like, they wouldn't even consider that tweet. What are you talking about? Because think about what that does to the history of the Chicago Bulls. Like, the joke is, like Keire said, you've sort of like pissed in the face of the people who actually made your org legendary. Do you know who Team Liquid was before Doublelift joined? A team that famously, their best finish ever was finishing third once and not going to Worlds. That was it. They were famously like the also-rans of the big orgs. They never had any, they never even made a final. Then this guy joins and they peel off 4 of these motherfuckers in a row. You know how hard it was to win 1 title back then? Spoiler, Cloud9 isn't even at 4 titles yet, are they? Let me think.
Exactly.
No, they've just reached 4 now. They've just reached 4 now. And it took them like fucking 10 years, well, more like 8 years. But no, that's how hard it is to win. So yeah, the idea you take this guy, could pick whichever you want. Doublelift's the obvious one for that, or even just in terms of role for role, Jensen. It's like, give me a break, mate. Like, that's just so cynical. That fucking, I know it'll just be some social media idiot manager. It's not like Steve Arnesen sent that tweet. I'll do this tweet immediately. It's not that harsh, but even so, that whole vibe definitely fucking annoyed me, mate. It's like, he's only been there 5 games. You fucking whatever. We'll let that one go for now. Let's talk about the rest of the team though, because here's the real sad part about Team Liquid now. Despite the fact I imagine we're going to now talk about them as the best team and the team that should win LCS, I also don't really expect them to do big things internationally, and the reason why is so sad. If this really was Bjergsen from like 3 or 4 years ago as a mid laner, this lineup is fire. If it's the current Bjergsen, this lineup gets a bit depressing, actually. Like, if I have Bwipo, but he's not even supposed to be my main carry, and he can just do Bwipo things, fuck, I love that. He's like, to me, I've always said he's like the wild card. He's like JW from Counter-Strike. He's just going to cause havoc. He's going to always be unpredictable. You're going to always have to pay some attention to him. He's always going to be dragging some of your mental energy to his lane. That's great. If he's essentially the best laner, well, now what the fuck am I doing? What am I playing with now? And then similarly, like the Core JJ angle. So Core JJ is supposed to be this genius roamer. He's going to take over the whole map. He's playing with Bjergsen, mate, who, as far as I can tell, never ever actually had really good synergy with his jungler and support simultaneously ever in his whole career. Like, ever. Can anyone ever think of a fucking lineup where that ever worked? Every Bjergsen team was everyone going, the jungler is shit. And then the support half the time was like, do they even connect on the map? Like, I think, unfortunately, on paper, I get why it's a fire roster. I'm a little bit more sceptical of the actual team I've seen in the server, though.
I think, like, the same way that C9 stole, like, away Berserker, TL's blessing is the fact that they got Hans Sama. Like, Hans Sama is, like, as an actual ADC carry mentality player, play for lane, play to win the game, responsibility resources, he was the man in EU, and they've gotten him, and he looks like he's in pretty, like, good, decent form. We'll see if he can pass the any, like, skill vampire test, and if, like, he just, like, starts, like, fludging downhill. Like, newsflash, Sven came over in super sick form. He was never the same again, by the way. This is why people like Doublelift are absolute phenoms, because they somehow managed to keep their skills up at a level that everyone thinks is low, but they don't realise you don't have the practice partners,
yes.
You don't have the people who can manage you fundamentally. You have to skill check yourself, and it's
yes.
really, 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 really hard. Another little problem is I don't know, this team is like an all-star team, but if I want Hans Sama to be like my like go-to guy and my main damage dealer, I think it's good that Bjergsen's like a low resource player right now. He's not taking a lot of CS off the map, but Core JJ doesn't play for lane, and Hans Sama loves to play for lane, and we've seen this exact problem with Trimby. If Hans Sama doesn't have a support that can keep up with him in lane, it really gimmicks your game. It really like bottlenecks your ability to play the game. The amateur guy that they brought in, I actually think looked better in terms of the laning. Yeah, that guy. I think he looked better in terms of like unleashing Hans Sama's like laning capabilities than Core JJ did. And you know, you've seen it with Doublelift, you've seen it with Tactical. Sometimes Core JJ's roam timers are a bit dodgy, where he just leaves his ADC and they get dove and they die. And I know that he like comes from a Korean system where it's really important to play around jungle economics and that, but with Santorin being your jungler, I'm not sure that's that important here. I really think they should really focus on enabling Bwipo and Hans Sama, and playing top to bot historically, or top to bot and bot to top, is one of the hardest ways to play League of Legends. Like, the teams that have done it ever, Smeb, look at his bot lane, Praying Gorilla, are you having a joke? Xiaohu, Gala and Ming, are you having a joke? Look at these teams. These are some of the best fundamental, best macro-based teams in the world. Are you that TL? Do you think you're that team? Because you have to be honest with yourself. I don't see it. We'll see how far they can take it, but I'm not sure how sold I am on this system.
By the way, I've also just realised you are effectively planning to send in the same team, Santorin and Bjergsen to Worlds.
Yes.
Again.
Yeah.
That's roll the blade clip. Some motherfuckers always trying to ice skate uphill. Yeah, exactly. That's you, Steve Arnett. You're going to put those two players together. One, they already went to Worlds. Go look that one up. And then two, did you see him when they were on their own? Fucking hell. Look, if they can break the bus this time, fair play. But history hasn't been kind. I'll give them that.
Yeah, like I don't think their mid jungle engine is something that you're going to play well into against any decent mid jungle. And you have a core JJ who wants to roam everywhere. So like where is the logic behind the team? It's the best players that you could get aside from like Jensen Bjergsen. You have all of these good players, but it doesn't necessarily fit together. The pieces don't make sense. Like it's just two contrasting different play styles. Whereas if you did have a better carry in either the mid or the jungle, maybe you had a Blaber. I think that Cloud9 and Team Liquid, if they swap junglers, like both teams might actually just be better. Because you can have Core JJ playing through Blaber, and that would be really, really interesting to watch.
Yeah, the joke is, I think that was even a Monty take he had in the off-season, was like, why doesn't Cloud9 Team Liquid just swap junglers? They'd be better. But the problem with that is, just in the way that GMs think in their brain, they'd be like, swap Blaber for Santorin? No way, bro. It's like, did you listen to what we were saying? It make the team better. It's all about the individual fucking value, is it, you idiot? But whatever. Well, that's by the by, isn't it? We can't fix the whole mentality of NA with one podcast. LS tried to with 100 podcasts. Right, what about this? Another thing I wanted to get your take on is this. The move that no one ever talks about, this just shows you how like personalities, what coaching's all about, is everyone talks like Team Liquid doesn't even have a coach. I mean, the joke is last year they didn't, but they've now got Gyotto, who obviously was with Immortals, and then if you go back, he was with Origin, and then if you go back before that, he was with fucking Splice, I think it was. Before that, he was with Schalke, so he's been with a whole bunch of different teams, but you notice there's a very differing level of talent there. And aside from having a few really good players in Origin, because they want to play with each other, this is really his first chance at like a true super, like the best players potentially. Because for me, there's a big difference in coaching. There's coaches who are amazing with like very little talent, or there's coaches who find their own talent or develop their talent, but there's also a different style of coach, and it's the coach that just coaches the best players, and their whole skill set is like they're all about like presence and get the buy-in from the player and know how to use the player and set your stars up to succeed, etc. I wanted to get your guys' thoughts. Like, obviously, I can only go off things I've heard from players or having them on my talk shows. I think Gyotto's a pretty good coach. He seems to have his own like vision of the game and stuff. I want to know, what do people think of that angle? Like, does that affect how you think Team Liquid will do all this set of players?
I don't know who's responsible for it. I'm going to attribute it to Gillo, and I'm not sure if it is. I don't know how much player input there is. I think their drafting's been like pretty good. They caught on to like a lot of the draft tactics with the early prio on Thresh, because it's the Thresh that enables the ADC. They have like they've obviously like been developing some stuff. It was nice to see like the Vigar. The player I think that's benefited the most in the change in dynamics is Santorin. Santorin looks to me, remember when Broxah basically had like a pathway of playing jungle when his mid laner was Nemesis? He would do like every single game, they would have a set plan for Broxah and he would like just follow it out. Santorin basically does this like early game execute every single game where he like pass ball and he hits bot lane at like a 30-second plus or minus different timer, and it has gotten first blood in every game apart from one, I think, which is pretty impressive. Like every single game they've played, they've managed to execute on it, and hopefully these teams are, you know, they're looking at like the VODs and they're seeing that this is like something, but he has managed to like confuse or misdirect or make people think they're not coming, and he's managed to execute. And as much as I'm a Santorin hater, like this guy's had like a lot more better like presence on the map. This guy's maybe it's because Bwippo has taken some of the primary engage. Some of this guy's like in secondary engaging and stuff is getting a lot better. So maybe it's to do with the coaching and stuff. But I've actually seen quite a big level up for Santorin. His team fighting's still a bit weird. His target priority is still a bit weird. But you know, these are things that actually can get better quite easily with the meta as the meta goes up. His jungle fundamentals I thought were like irreplaceable, but they seem a lot better now, which is hopeful.
Yeah, I think that a lot of these, like, he'll path red and then go all of the way to bot lane, just hoping that it works. And it does work. And I'm not really sure if it's kind of a band-aid to force the Team Liquid bot lane to get ahead, and then to play through that. I'm not sure how much of a negative it's going to be to Team Liquid when teams finally start realizing that they're always going to try to gank bot early. Like, I think that might have a pretty big deficit into how this Team Liquid squad is wanting to play right now. And I'm not sure that they're going to recuperate easily from it. But I don't know too much about Gyotto. I've heard that he's a decent coach. So they probably have a whole different ways of playing it. And it's not the end of the world if you're a Trundle and you're 2 camps down. That doesn't really affect the game that much. But yeah, I'm not sure if that's going to be something that will harm Team Liquid and if it might just be a Band-Aid. Because Bjergsen teams always happen to have a lot of Band-Aids.
I'll also say as well, like, the sad thing is, I am sort of, like, I'm a bit like you, Keire. I'm just out on Thorin, mate. Like, I feel like waiting for him to go to Worlds again is like fucking Charlie Brown going, I can't wait to kick that football. She's surely going to let me kick it this time. It's like, no, fucking learn your lesson, mate. Because the problem with Thorin is this. He's one of those players, dude, where I think if I could control his brain, he'd be so good. Because I get the vibe. If you notice, it even happens in LCS. He always looks so good right until that game he doesn't in the playoffs. It'll always be in the playoffs. There's always one game where this guy just breaks, and sometimes that's the end of the playoffs. Sometimes, he picks up the next game, but then he busts the game. Like, the problem with that guy I've noticed is he just feels like the guy where I'm not one of those people you'll notice who, I think, for example, like, I don't think Power of Evil and Froggen are pussies. I don't think they're just scared to play Assassins and like be aggro. I think their style of play and their philosophy on the game is a conservative, farm-based style around mages, right? I genuinely think Thorin sometimes does just like sort of play a bit pussy. I think sometimes the moment just gets to him, especially internationally. Because the thing is this, it's not that he does the blabber and does like an outrageous int that loses you the game. He just becomes invisible. I just forget he's in the game, and I'm like, it's only like towards, like, there'll be like a moment where I'll be like, what the fuck's he doing actually? Where is this guy? And then I'm like, oh fuck, he's done it again. He's wrecked us again. And the problem is I have to watch for that, because at the moment it's all looking great, like you're saying, but I'm just waiting for when that happens, because that's the one area I don't know what's going to take, but there's some mental level up Thorin has to make if he's going to be like an international jungler. I've seen him at too many worlds now.
Yeah, it's just too common. It just like happens way too much. I'll say one thing. The one thing I'm looking for, to definitely coach out of this team, because it's really, really bad, is 2 things. This team's like dragon setups are like, of any of the teams I've seen, they are the worst. TL are the ultimate offenders of staring at drakes being taken and like not doing anything and setting up purely. They literally lost their only game to 100 Thieves because 4 people sat and stared at a drake being taken like it was a movie, and then the team engaged on them and killed them all. And Hansama was on the opposite side of the map. So, like, how do you plan on taking that? Do you plan on taking that drake if Hansama with 4 items is on the opposite side farming a blue buff? Like, what is going on here, guys? That the level of disconnect there, that's really, really crazy. And if you're talking about pros that are like, very experienced, that's worrying. Second of all, you go from Drake, now let's go up to Baron. They are the ultimate Herald and Baron, like, bait team. They get, like, so, like, sucked in to this objective, and they play it, like, so uncleanly and messy. It's very, very strange. The order in which they, like, do the procedures really... to me, this is something like coaches like have to like drill into players, where you like push out the lanes, then you set up the vision, you scan, you then go to the Baron, start the Baron dance, like come back and forward. TL doesn't have a Baron dance. TL's just like, it's nothing. It's literally just a bunch of players staring at Whipple going, you're the playmaker, do something. And that doesn't work. What happens if Whipple's tilted in a game? What happens if Whipple's behind in a game? What if Whipple's not an engaged champion? He's now on a carry champion like Fiora or something. Like, these could be some things that are a little bit dicey for me, especially when, when I see an NA team, I like to see consistent like things quite early, for then they can build upon those fundamentals. I see some quite big gaps in their team already, that they're not disappearing. I know it's quite early, but they're like reoccurring themes that are a bit worrying, because I've seen a lot of NA teams go, and it's the same things I'm seeing all the time.
Yeah, and I see Team Liquid as one of these teams to where everybody has had success in the past playing all of these different disparate styles. Like Hansama, even when Rogue wasn't winning the championships, he was still looking like one of the best players on the team. So everybody has all of these strategies, and I don't know how easy this team is going to be to coach. Like, because you have everybody kind of wanting to go back to potentially wanting to go back to what was successful for them before, and the styles don't match. So that could be a scary thing with, can this team even be coached through these simple macro plays? Because even if they, like, doing a Baron, doing a Dragon, these are very easy things to coach. But these players might not be as malleable because of how seasoned they are.
I also will say as well, to me, Core JJ is a little bit like Hylissang. Like, you don't coach what he does in the game. Like, he has the green light to do whatever he wants, because those are two players for me that are unique for their role, the support role in the West, where it's like, if they make a crazy move that to you doesn't make sense, they might be right and you might be wrong. Like, they've just got the track record that says that to me. I also think as well, if you look at the kinds of moves they try to make, where they just roam seemingly randomly, like, the reason you can't coach a player like that is you actually wouldn't be able to pause the game and take him out and say, what are you doing right now? Like, I don't think consciously they could explain. Like, there's that. It's a bit like, essentially what they do with their roams is like when people like Prime Caps do an outplay or Knight or something. They can't consciously be thinking of this, boys. Essentially, they just sort of like, their mind goes and they just let themselves do genius things. And sort of the problem with players like that is, one, they've got to be their absolute best, because you've got to trust them that they're going to do this shit. And then two, you are flying blind a little bit. You've got to coach the rest of the players to know how to follow these things up, but you can't really, like, those aren't set players when they do that. I know fans think they are, but like, they aren't. That is just genius taken over at that point in time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
listen, definitely tricky to coach, but at the same time, could also be like an incredible joker to have up your sleeve if it works out, as you've seen with those aforementioned players when their teams were at their best. It's the reason why those are some of the best. Notice those two players are in essentially the best Western teams to ever play, minus G2. They're in the Fnatic and they're in the Team Liquid, so pretty good track record. Right, what about this? Yeah, go on.
Yep, especially when you're not going to be as individually skilled as a Korean or Chinese team. It's really just never been a Western team that's like that you need some kind of strategical wild card that's going to be the thing that wins you the game.
I even think, by the way, that's actually a rare edge that these two teams can have. Not literally these lineups, but if they go head to head with the Koreans, right? When you think of the great like support players in the world, like, look, there are definitely players I would say are better than those players, but actually the kind of like playmaking we're talking about, they actually match up very well against those Koreans in that sense. Like, is Keire overall a better support player than Hylissang? Yeah, probably. But the difference is Keire going to do some of the shit that Hylissang might in a game, or even Core JJ for that matter. So I think, yeah, it is actually a rare edge that you have if you're a Westerner for my money. So I certainly hope these teams can make use of it. Should we talk about 100 Thieves then? Or was there any other TL angle we didn't hit?
Yeah, there's one thing I would like to say, like, as a little note of an analysis that's very unique about TL this year as a top team. I don't know why it is, they don't grow their gold leads. I don't know how they're doing it. I haven't broken this like down. Maybe it's because like double lift teams like won the league for like so long, but it's kind of like a weird thing. TL has a gold lead, and then it just kind of stays the same amount. Like, not literally, guys. Like, I know it does, but it doesn't expand like 2 to 3 to 5 to 8 to 15, like, you know what I mean, to 10, and they like, win the game and that. They kind of just like, they get 3,000 gold, or they come out of the laning stage with 2,000 gold, and then they have 2,000 gold in the next dragon, then they have 2,000 gold at the next dragon, and they have 2,000 gold in the next dragon. I don't know if they're like missing side lane farm, or they're just like trading farm equally with the team, but that is a very, 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 very dangerous thing to do against players and teams. If you're coming out of lanes with leads, to do against like elite LCK and LPL teams, because I'll tell you one thing for free, NA teams I doubt across the board out of 10 times will be out team fighting these teams, even from like 3-4k like gold leads. Your like team fighting fundamentals just aren't as good sometimes. This team, I think, unless they find a new system of play, are going to have to learn to like grow their gold leads. Either like you grow it through bot, or you grow it through top, or you take jungle camps and you eat another person's quadrant. They're going to have to find a way to start accelerating their gold leads and speeding their games up, because they play tragically slow, and it's very, very, very like worrying if this is a team that's going to be like presented as like the NA like hope.
Okay. Right, let's jump over them. We'll talk about 100 Thieves, as I said we would. Right, I want to start here. Right, since 100 Thieves, unlike the two teams we just talked about, made no roster moves. They kept the exact 5 players who are technically the reigning champions of the LCS. The only change the org made, basically, was like they low-key added Mithy as another assistant coach, and he left Cloud9. That was it, basically. Right, the place I want to start is this. Because unlike the other teams, there are a lot of known quantities here from 100 Thieves because of the sample size we've all got to see them play. We've even seen them play internationally, and in fact, spoiler, they ended up playing against the world champions and another semi-finalist team because their group ended up just being way better than you would have thought at Worlds. The question I have is this, Yasukeh, right? The main criticism against 100 Thieves, even when they were at their peak at the end of last year and even going to Worlds, was a lot of people said they were the team with macro where it's not even like it was bad, they just clearly didn't know what to do beyond a certain point in the game. It's like unless they'd sort of won the game already or had an outstanding lead, they just looked lost at times. Like, what do you think of 100 Thieves now? Like, do they still have these issues, do you think?
Well, I mean, if you think about the going into the expectations of like when we saw 100 Thieves in the playoffs of the summer split, they weren't expected to win. So even if they're like going at their level that they're at right now, this is actually the expected level if we discount their peak in the summer split. Like they're not super like it doesn't it's not a question about why they're at the level that they're at. They weren't expected to be continuously first in the LCS. I think that they play really well around closer, and that was the big issue that made them not as good before, but they're doing good plays around him now and really helping facilitate him. And he's in their wins, they're still playing very well around that. I'm not sure if they still have those issues of not being able to close out games. I would have to just see more games, more sets between them. I'm not sure if that's still an issue for them.
Okay. Where are you at, Keire?
That's it. When I look at this team, I basically was like, Reaper looked at the double lift teams that like beat him all the time, and he was like, okay, it's now my turn to have like the double lift team. This team is like just the double lift team, but they've got an aggressive jungler instead of Xmithy. Like, Someday is literally just taking the role of impact. He will sack everything for the team. He will sometimes play carries if it's the right matchup, but the majority of the time he will play off-meta tanks. He will literally be placed on an island and be expected to use his experience and his maturity to like withhold ganks and control his lane. And they will always play front-to-back team fights, rely on like engage-centric supports, and their backline and mid and ADC will carry and try and outmuscle every single team fight. And if you like look at their damage percentage from the backline on Abagidage and FBI, it's like some of the highest percentages in the league. They're like 30% almost each. Like, these two people like get a lot of protection from their team, they get a lot of space made for their team, and they output a lot of damage. And right now it's like working and the system's good. They have like the best real team fighting fundamentals in the league. That's a dangerous thing in NA where like teams are extremely sloppy. Sometimes of all the teams I've seen, their laning is the bit that's a bit dodgy. Abadagi's laning can be a bit weird. I'm not too sure about his champion pool. The bot lane, I don't think they're quite as synced up as they were before. They were actually one of the really like elite like 2v2 bot lanes in terms of NA, so it'll be good to see the space go. I'm actually quite high on them, possibly outright winning the split. I would like to see how consistent they can keep this playstyle going, because like, you know, that it's like a hammer blow that you see is coming, but can you resist it? It's the same thing every time, but do you have the fundamentals? Do you know how to beat it? That's a question, and majority of the teams to me look like they don't.
Yeah, one of the problems I have with this team overall, 100 Thieves, is, look, I'll set it up in the way that the terms that Yasukeh used. Like, for the LCS, first of all, if you look at where their roster actually was before they, out of nowhere, won LCS, they're totally fine. Like, they're still an elite team, they're still a good team, they're still in the mix, they've got good players, there's nothing really to complain about with the roster overall, the coaching staff seems good. Like, in general, there are loads of markers that are, like, among the best, pointing upwards. The problem I have is, like, I also don't know with this team how much much further it can go. Like, I see a lot of the things they've already done. Like, yeah, they've got strengths, they've got good players. It's like, but there's also not a lot of uncharted territory for the team. Remember, they didn't even change coaching staff really beyond adding an assistant coach. So to me, I don't really know if they can be like the best. And I personally think this is the team, just like at Worlds. There's no universe this team can do anything internationally, boys. Like, you just need such a crazy group to draw at a Worlds. I can't even really envision how it's possible, especially not in the days where we're going to have for LPL teams, for LC. Like, as long as we're going to have that shit, it's over, boys. There's no, like, super easy group that you're going to get at this point in time. It's not just so unlikely it'll happen. So the problem they have internationally is this. The two best players on paper for me are actually probably Closer and FBI, I think, relative to their roles. Abidag is what he is. He's just a good, above-average EU mid laner, but that's it. He's not going to be the guy internationally who does some, like, Jensen shit for my money. So my problem with them is this. FBI is a good player. I actually noticed him even before they won the championship last year. He was probably the best ADC. Like, he was doing a really good job. He also was one of the only fucking ADCs that could actually play at Aphelios and LCS and look competent doing it. So I thought that was a positive. Problem is, though, like, best case scenario, he's like a poor man's double lift. He's not going to be an actually true world-class ADC for my money. I think you're just reaching a little bit for that one. And then for me, I just don't see there's any world where realistically, like, Abidag can hold up against the best mids in the entire world. And right now, mid is, again, a super stacked position if we go to Worlds tomorrow. So my issue is this, and this is the one problem I have with their team, is if I was the coach of 100 Thieves, I would very heavily and very cynically play around Closer. I would make my whole game around Closer and essentially giving FBI the drafts to carry team fights. So that's why when I look at the current meta that they have right now, I don't want to see Closer playing back-to-back Trundle games. Trundle! If you think of Closer, you think of Trundle. No, like, that's a game I'm playing just because it's in the meta and people are like, Trundle's fucking sick, you gotta play it. It's like, mate, I've got Closer, like that, Diana, fucking Xin Zhao. Like, you can imagine that you already can in your brain think of the champions you want to see. Lee Sin, by the way, he can play Lee Sin right now. He can play that Lee Sin even when it's not in meta, for fuck's sake. Like, that's what I would aggressively do. I get that, look, Reaper is someone, if you know, he is also kind of like the Proto LS. He will go to his vision, he will go to his drafting style, he will go to what he thinks works in the meta, and he will, by the way, also just essentially try to draft squeeze you to win 1BO1. Sometimes he does that. It's the reason why his teams are fantastic in the regular split, you'll notice. He has some of the best regular split performances of any coach ever. His teams are always in the playoffs, they're always in the semis or beyond. The problem I have is, like, I don't know, actually, if they in this team even play to their strengths always that much, mate. Like, sometimes I feel like they could do so much more. I don't hate on the team, though. I think, again, if you know the context of the team, they're perfectly fine. I've nothing against them. I just don't... essentially, the problem I have with 100 Thieves is there's no oomph for me. There is occasionally, like if there's a game where they put Closer on a nice champion, if they can make it to the mid game and it's just an easy enough game to play out, they're a canny enough team, but there's no, like, special sauce to 100 Thieves for me. They're a little bit meh.
It's really sad because, like, one of the, like, mechanically, like, expressive, like, junglers and crazy carry junglers right now is Gwen. But 100 Thieves, I think, have to ban it, like, really often because... Like, the whole idea is that you flex it. You can put it on your top laner and you can put it on your jungler.
But they can't put it on their top, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure, like, how competent someday would be, like, on Gwen, or how ideal that as, like, an ideal would be. Like, if they started presenting that, like, you know, that's good and stuff, but I'm not sure how, like, consistent it'd be. And so I think you're right now, and because there's, like, the way 100 Thieves, like, play around Abidag on, like, certain, like, picks, and have lane like, playing bad matchups, and they've lane him to be fixed by Closer. You know, you kind of, like, they're gimmicking, like, Closer's game, which is, it can be, like, a dangerous thing to get, like, into, because, like, basically relies on a player who's not as good as Closer being better than Closer, like, with the resources that you're giving them. Will Abidag be that against, like, some of the top LPL teams, some of the top LCK teams, LEC teams? I'm not sure. I'm not sure how consistent that will be.
I would say one thing about someday learning new things, like potentially learning a Gwen. You see them picking, like, a lot of Renekton, a lot of Gnar, a lot of things that have been in the meta forever. Both the game, someday both played as and against Tryndamere. And I feel like he played both sides of the matchup just horrendously. Like the game that he played against Kumo's Gnar, Kumo's Tryndamere, where he was Gnar, he just completely butchered the laning phase and, like, just should have had such an easier time. And they probably would have won that if someday had a more stable laning phase because of how far behind he got. And when he played Tryndamere, even though he was 7-0-13 or some ridiculous score, like built incorrectly, he didn't use his ults correctly, he team fought poorly. It just happened to be that the circumstances of the game allowed him to make all of these blunders and still have a really good KDA, still look like he was carrying. So Tryndamere is something that's more or less new in the meta. And so far, I don't think they've picked it up well or played against it well. And Gwen might be a similar thing.
By the way, have you actually played with Closer much in solo queue?
Yeah, I've played a couple games with him. He's a really good jungler. Just
wondered if you had any thoughts on him.
Yeah, no, he just wins. Like, he destroys enemy junglers. Like,
because to me, he's the player where, there was it was a rumor basically behind the scenes that just like they did with Oceanic region, maybe what Riot would do to help NA is just say every minor region doesn't count as an import essentially, or it counts as half an import, some shit like that. The player I remember when I heard that thinking the joke is for this team now with FBI it'd be mega, but the first player I remember thinking about is that will make Closer so valuable, it's nuts. Because if he actually was counted essentially as just an NA player, not an import, mate, this guy is essentially what I always wanted Dardoch to be. Just like a fucking sick mechanical ganking jungler. I've always wanted that in NA, because if people haven't noticed, sadly in NA, maybe it's because they have this, this weird culture and how they play the games a bit weird. You tend to end up actually with, it's more people in the vein of the Xmithies and the fucking, let me think, Santorin, Meteor. You notice none of these are super aggro ganking junglers, especially not in the period when you're thinking about them at their best. NA just hasn't really flexed into that kind of champion. I mean, as Keire even said, Svenskeren came over as a super mechanical duelist jungler, and he ended up just as a fucking dog about 4 years later. NA in general hasn't ever had that, wow factor from the jungle. But if you actually have him on the right champion, he can be it. This guy's a fucking stud. I think he's really good.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the only game that Sunday played Gwen in, just to go back to that point, was against CLG, and I don't count that, by the way, because they also had, they got Twisted Fate, the Gwen, they got the Miracle Draft, because whoever's coaching over at CLG closed their eyes during pick and ban, but I'm not really that convinced. I'm now thinking to somebody, he's played 3 carry games, Tryndamere, Gwen, and he played a Jace game. Some of these Jace used to be somewhat legit. Those days are that's 5 years ago, guys. Why are we doing this? Why are we pretending players are people they aren't? Come on, be yourself. The only way I can see this team kind of showing a new face and stuff is if they themselves have Abadagi start to pick up some of these stranger pocket picks. For an example, Abadagi won't be contesting Zillion, but Abadagi has shown that he would be able to play a Azir while he contests Vigar. How broad can Abadagi's champion pool get, and how many things can you add to just even give you one trump card against someone? Because in those BO1s at international tournaments, they're the type of things you need if you're going to fall behind in other things. You need to try and catch people out with a 1-up. So I think, if I'm 100 Thieves and I'm going to stick to this style, I need to throw something spicy into the mix to try and catch it out. I've had a full year or 2 years of building up certain fundamentals. This is the time. It's spring. It's early. We should this is where I would like to see Reaper trying to bring in some spicier things and newer things to the stage games, because you can play your old way. Let's see if we can get something new in the house.
I do think, by the way, anyone who's fielding an import/EU mid laner, obviously you can have one if it's a resident now, but I'm talking about a really skilled mid laner essentially. The idea that more teams in LCS aren't trying Veigar mid is unbelievable to me, dude. Because one, we've already alluded to the fact people don't even fucking lane properly, so you can get through lane just like Bjergsen did on Zillion for years. You can get through lane on stuff that maybe shouldn't even in certain matchups. But more importantly, dude, NA is the region that forever has been obsessed with dragon fights. That champion can be so broken if you have it on your team when you're setting up for those dragon fights. He can literally just inhibit you moving across a certain area. You can't get through a certain choke point. Why this has already been played? I looked it up. It's only been played 5 times in LCS so far. That actually blows my mind, dude. I feel that's an area I would be, in the current meta, I would be trying to flex that way more. I'd be trying to use that anytime I could. At least threaten it, for fuck's sake.
Yeah,
On you go, Yasukeh.
I was going to say that would be a perfect pick for them because it also just sets up the jungler so well, and it's such a strong backline threat in the later stages of the game. And also, it's pretty much just one of the strongest champions in the game right now, if not the strongest. Like, I'm really surprised at how it's not having a lot of priority right now. People probably just don't have a lot of time in it. But like, if you're picking up picks like 3 months after their OP, after they've already gotten nerfed, like, what's the point?
I mean, the joke is if my boys Jensen and Frogger were playing in the league, it'd already been picked about 10 times, wouldn't it? Like, they alone would have been, Frogger would be maining it at this point in time, mate.
It's kind of,
come on, Keire.
If you look at like what's like defining about like NA right now, like teams obviously around the world are all like caught up in like the Jinx Aphelios craze, like trading those picks, right? Jinx is like a champion whose her survivability is entirely tied to her mobility. Kill one target, you run around like a psychopath. Veigar like basically stops that. If you ever get a cage round a Jinx player, our game's over. Like, you know, you've got the ultimate. It's also a really interesting thing. I was talking with some friends and we were thinking about ways to like beat C9 when they had the LS edition. And one of the things we came up with is if you want to beat a team that's going to play as slow as TL and C9, you should just think bigger. Like, just be bigger. Like, do a bigger thing late game. So, like, Veigar scales, like, infinitely. He just keeps on scaling. AP numbers just get bigger and bigger. And eventually that R, one-shots, like, someone. You, like, literally flash forward R, and the person just blows up and dies. And if they want to play extremely slow and they want to play around set objectives, we were, like, thinking of, like things like, maybe not so much, but like return of like Ziggs, depends on the numbers, but like Xerath, there was like lots of like picks that we felt like were way more open and malleable to like the NA like way, and Veigar was definitely one of them because just with its infinite scaling, it's like, I don't know if you'll be able to say this, Yasukeh, it's actually, is it not quite effective against Trynd because you're able to like gatekeep him within like the gates, like when you place a gate, like Trynd can't like spin through it and stuff, even though can't.
He also does typically take 50% tenacity.
Oh, right, fair enough. So you just laugh at the gate. Fair enough.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Fair enough.
But yeah, no, for sure. Veigar is definitely a infinite scaling champion that actually is really good in the late game. You contrast that to like a Nasus, who, even though he does have this infinite scaling thing, he's best in the mid game once he has like 300 to 500 stacks. Because that champion is just going to get kited permanently.
Yes.
Whereas Veigar still has all of his utility and his damage just gets infinitely higher, and you can't keep building more MR.
Yes. I'll say, by the way, again, I don't know where you would find this, but I remember actually, it might even be on his YouTube channel, there was actually a game I remember watching of Frog, and I think it was in the off-season last year, play on Veigar, where he did just go for like, it's like a 3,000 AP, like Veigar or something ridiculous. And mate, it is ridiculous how strong that fucking ultimate is by the end. It's like, it's actually outrageous what it can do.
Yeah, it really is. Like, because you can't like flash or anything. If he flashes forward suicide, and he kills your ADC, if you've got the Aphelios or you've got the Jinx, you're going to out damage any team fight. You know what I mean? Even though your Veigar's potentially dead, you've won. You've actually like won the game once that ADC's gone. Like, it's just the nature of the beast right now.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of Veigar V2 playing Veigar in his gameplay, and it's more or less just an AP AD carry that does DPS better than a lot of AD carries and burst when played well.
Yeah, I've looked it up. I just Googled it. There's literally a game where Froggen has 1,500 AP Veigar with 450 plus stacks. And it's just called the ultimate one shot. It's like, man, that sounds so obscene. It's fucking... And by the way, the joke is, like, if they'd have waited, LS himself would love that champion. The joke is, like, the longer they fuck around in the game, the stronger you get. Like, in that scenario, they're just painting themselves into a corner even more, but whatever. Alas, LS, RIP. Gone too soon, all that good shit. This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Iskander, Mac Pugnatio Rajcula, Travis Goff, Adam Ochs, Animosity, Butt Pounder 420, Hades, Jensen Goh, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Thooorin, William Peyton Lacy, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and a special thank you goes out to Jerky's Minion as always. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my content? When to ask me a question in my monthly video AMA? Do you want teasers? Find out who the guests are going to be on my shows. Maybe you want to be part of one of those lengthy but in-depth and interesting discussions about esports with yours truly. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.